To thank you, Hamish, for that very good introduction and good framing of some of the issues that we're all wrestling with. Before I start, can I just acknowledge everyone at Business New Zealand and their superstar CEO, Catherine Rich, and just say thank you for your relentless advocacy and all of your support for the broader New Zealand business community. Your organisation, as you well know, plays a critical role, not just at the national level, but also in elevating the voices of the respective regional bodies up and down the country, and you make a great contribution into those communities as we see across New Zealand. Can I just also thank Salesforce and Oricon so much for sponsoring today's event. We really do appreciate it. Now today my intention is to put this year's budget into context, and first I want to speak briefly about our economic recovery here at home and why I remain confident despite international uncertainty. And then I'm going to make the case for two big priorities of Budget 2025. Fiscal consolidation and also economic growth, and why they matter and some steps that we're taking to make them happen. Now, it's fair to say that Budget 2025 arrives against a challenging international backdrop. Trade tensions overseas have seen revised forecasts across the world as exporters and consumers come under sustained pressure. And the sharp deterioration of financial markets that we've seen in April have somewhat recovered in recent days and weeks, but the markets remain volatile. And experts offshore are leaning into that uncertainty. I saw that the Bank of Canada even chose to publish two separate economic scenarios in their latest statement instead of one single set of forecasts. And I don't blame them, frankly, for having a bob each way. And so for a small, open economy like New Zealand, the international environment clearly matters a lot, but I remain confident about our recovery. Inflation remains anchored below 3%, and interest rates continue to fall, supporting households with the cost of living and providing the foundation for a domestic economic recovery. The official cash rate has fallen consistently and considerably from 5.5% down to 3.5%, with economists now picking further cuts are on the way soon. And I do want to acknowledge for households, interest rate relief will be a slow and steady process. For example, according to the Reserve Bank, average interest rates on outstanding mortgages have now only fallen for just 4 months in a row, having previously risen for 37 months in a row. But the good news is that financial relief for households will keep rolling through, and with around $60 billion of mortgages set to roll over in just the next 3 months, that will help. In short, the trend is our friend, and even if I know many families and businesses won't be feeling that relief just quite yet. Now, at the same time, an export-led recovery is now well underway in regional New Zealand. Dairy prices are strong, despite global headwinds, supporting farmers now to pay down debt and put more money back into rural communities. Fruit exports are booming, hitting $5 billion in value in the 12 months to March, driven by a big jump in kiwi fruit sales. And the tourism industry is also growing rapidly, with visitor numbers now back recovering and now back at 86% of pre-COVID levels. But importantly, tourism expenditure was up 23% in 2024. So it's not surprising then that the recovery is looking brighter in regional New Zealand and also in the South Island in particular. And many of you would have seen, Westpac just last week highlighted that Otago and Canterbury and Southland, consumer confidence and growth in retail activity is outpacing what we see across the rest of the country. And our government is working really hard to make sure we support that rural recovery. We've got a steady diet of pro-growth deregulation, a strong focus on RMA reform, and fresh efforts to break into new markets offshore are highlights of that agenda so far. And we know the difference that quality trade agreements can make to our growth prospects. For example, in the 12 months since the EU FTA came into force, our exports to the European Union have grown by 25%. And for exporters, that's worth an additional $1 billion. So whether it's CER, the CPTPP, the China, UK, more recent UAE and GCC FTAs, our farmers and our exporters are now blessed with a latticework of trade agreements negotiated successively by ministers and diplomats over many years. Now, clearly, India will be an important next step, and it was incredibly positive to see Minister of Trade Todd McClay, who's doing a great job, and he's sitting right here, announce on Monday that the first formal round of our in-person FTA negotiations kicked off this week. Now, all of that brings me to the budget, and it won't surprise you to learn that lifting New Zealand's long-run economic performance has been our primary focus in designing Budget 2025. Yes, that has shaped decisions we have made on individual initiatives, some of which I'll touch on shortly, But our fiscal strategy, including our desire to return to surplus and the wider impact on inflation, interest rates and growth, has also been very much front of mind. And you might have seen Nicola's announcement last week that this year's operating allowance would be smaller than previously signalled at just $1.3 billion. And that will be the smallest operating allowance in a decade and ensures that Treasury can still forecast a surplus within the next 4 years. And that was the right decision for several reasons. First, it represents a really fresh commitment to necessary fiscal consolidation, because in recent years New Zealand has been living beyond its means, and that has come at a significant cost. To give you a feel for it, since 2017, net core Crown debt has risen by $120 billion. And if you put that another way, that's $60,000 in additional debt for every single household in New Zealand. So as a proportion of our economy, debt has ballooned from just 21.6% of GDP in 2017 to today it's around 43% of GDP today, higher than it's ever been at any time since the 1990s. So at the same time, the cost of servicing that national debt has more than doubled as well, from $3.5 billion in 2017 to almost $9 billion today is what we're facing in interest rate costs. Now, in some areas, spending more is definitely the right thing to do. In health, and education, and law and order, and defence, and transport, my government is prioritising significant new investments. And each of those areas are a priority for New Zealanders, and they require more funding to deliver the quality public services that Kiwis have come to expect. But that comes with trade-offs, because spending more on everything, as I've seen some commentators calling for, would mean larger deficits, it would mean more debt, and it would mean ultimately fewer choices in future budgets as the cost of servicing our debt grows even larger and the prospect of returning to a surplus evaporates. So managing and responding to critical risks is also more challenging, much more challenging, when you've got higher levels of public debt. And if you can think back, New Zealand was incredibly well served through the GFC, through the Christchurch earthquake recovery, and during COVID, because successive ministers of finance had made difficult choices to ensure that New Zealand had low levels of public debt. And I think our responsibility is to do what we can to leave a similar inheritance for future administrations as well. Now, secondly, a smaller allowance supports lower interest rates and stronger business activity. And sadly, recent experiences have forced us to relearn the fundamentals of economics, including the reality that if governments borrow and they spend too much, interest rates are forced to go higher to compensate, putting huge pressure on family budgets and private sector activity. Now, the good news is the converse is absolutely true. More restrained fiscal policy supports interest rates to remain low, enabling businesses to grow and families to get ahead under their own steam. ANZ's initial estimate last week was that the smaller operating allowance would in fact support interest rates being 5 to 10 basis points lower than they otherwise would be. And you've seen, and Treasury has also estimated that with a tighter budget package, interest rates would be up to 30 basis points lower by the end of the forecast period. And so for a family with a mortgage, or a farmer, or an entrepreneur taking on debt to grow their business, that means real financial relief and more opportunity to be able to get ahead. Careful spending, low interest rates, and robust private sector growth sits at the very, very heart of our economic strategy as a government, as we seek to create jobs and boost exports, lift incomes, and promote more innovation and investment. Responsible fiscal management also supports our economic reputation offshore, because for a small economy like New Zealand, that's absolutely critical. It means that we can borrow more affordably when we have to, and guarantees that even in periods of global turmoil, we are a trusted destination for trade and investment. Now, third, the smaller operating allowance was the right call because keeping our word actually matters. And Nicola has been consistent in her commitment to deliver a pathway back to surplus and to maintain debt at prudent levels. Conditions can and do change, but it is a credit to her that the budget in 2025 will demonstrate a return to surplus despite a challenging global backdrop. And that's the result you expect when you anchor your budget decisions in your fiscal strategy instead of allowing the pressures of the day to drag you off course. And I know there are some commentators calling for larger allowances and more spending, but they need to be really honest that those decisions will mean more debt, they will mean more deficits, and an indefinite delay to New Zealand returning to surplus. And more debt and more deficits is a fiscal strategy, but for a small internationally exposed country like New Zealand, it's also an incredibly risky one. Now, at the same time, just as grey clouds bring silver linings, even tight budgets present opportunities. And in Budget 2025, we'll be taking further steps in our long-term mission to lift economic growth and to boost economic productivity. Earlier this year, we published our government's Going for Growth agenda. If you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to get a copy and go through it. But it outlines a range of actions that we're taking to get the New Zealand economy moving and to realise the incredibly vast potential that we have. Each of those actions fits into one of 5 pillars that we've identified as being absolutely critical to lifting economic growth and productivity and therefore improving New Zealanders' collective standard of living. 1, developing talent. 2, encouraging more science, innovation and technology. 3, introducing more competitive business settings. 4, promoting global trade and investment. And 5, delivering quality world-class infrastructure for growth. And each of those pillars will have strong representation in Budget 2025. Today I just want to touch on a few of them and some of the small steps we are taking to underpin our growth mission. And if I start with encouraging science, innovation and technology being one of those pillars, because in January at my State of the Nation speech I spoke briefly about our vision for our science sector. I want to see a much sharper focus on commercialisation, much more stronger ties through to the business community and a rapid access to ideas and innovation from overseas. And capital investment will actually be critical to our growth journey, but New Zealand won't achieve a step change in our living standards if we invest more, but we continue to lag behind the global technological frontier. I think Hamish was alluding to that point. In Budget 2025, we'll be allocating the funding that we need to give effect to the changes I announced earlier this year, including the establishment of the 3 new public research organisations. Now, I also know that following a review of the research and development tax incentive that kicked off last year, the business community has been looking for some certainty on the future of that program. And that review was required in law, and the final report hasn't yet been tabled in Parliament. However, I can confirm today that we are retaining the RDTI in this year's budget so that businesses have the certainty that they need to keep on investing and to keep going for growth. Now, promoting global trade and investment has also been a focus of my government in 2025, even before the recent bout of uncertainty offshore. As I said earlier, part of the task has been to bring fresh energy to New Zealand's proud history of achieving trade agreements offshore. And Todd's work on finalising 2 new trade agreements in the Middle East, while we continue to work hard towards a trade agreement with India, is a great example. But promoting New Zealand as an attractive destination for investment and a shelter from the global storm has also been a personal focus of mine. And so in March, the government hosted an investment summit here in Auckland with attendees representing an estimated $6 trillion in capital as we showcased opportunities for them to partner and invest with the Crown, iwi and also the private sector. And we're seeing some real progress, including an outstanding deal worth around $1 billion signed by Waikato Tainui and Brookfield Asset Management to further develop the Ruakura inland port. But of course, we want to see a lot more. And yes, that means getting our structural settings right, including rewriting the Overseas Investment Act so that major investments from offshore are consented faster and much more reliably. But for small countries who have to compete hard for that share of mind, but also that share of wallet, we also need a team of national champions constantly making the case for New Zealand as an outstanding place to do business and to invest in. In January, I announced that that team would be led by a new group called BusinessNZ, an entity specifically responsible for attracting foreign investment to New Zealand and providing the critical concierge services that have allowed other countries like Singapore, like Ireland, to punch above their weight in securing FDI. And I can confirm today that funding will be allocated for BusinessNZ in Budget 2025, ensuring that they can crack on and get the job done. Now, modern, reliable infrastructure, if I can talk to that, and my government's efforts to deliver more of it to communities right across the country will also play a major role in our Going for Growth plan. And it's why capital expenditure, including for frontline services like health and education, will be a priority in Budget 2025. But as I acknowledged earlier, the operating allowance in this year's budget will be a little smaller than previously signalled. However, total capital expenditure allocated in the budget is a little higher than forecast at $6.8 billion, split across health, education, defence, transport and other portfolios. And when that is offset by the savings identified in this year's budget, it means the net capital allowance is about $4 billion compared to the $3.6 billion previously signalled in the budget policy statement. Now, for businesses, that investment represents a huge opportunity to develop critical skills and capability and also to promote growth for many years to come. And for Kiwis, it will mean another big investment in the quality frontline services like health and education that they deserve. Now, the two remaining pillars, our efforts to develop talent and also to promote competitive business settings, will also feature prominently in the budget, but I won't be making any announcements about that today. However, as Nicola confirmed last week, and I can confirm again today, there will be a small number of measures in this year's budget designed to make it easier for you and your businesses to invest, whether they're based here or offshore. Because if we really want to create high-paying jobs, to lift incomes and to make New Zealand a hub for innovation and investment, we need to make our business environment much, much more attractive. So I'm optimistic that Budget 2025 will take some very positive steps in that direction. So I think the Minister of Finance was exactly right last week to say that Budget 2025 won't be a lolly scramble. And it's not that we can't afford it, although frankly we can't. It's not that it wouldn't feel good, because frankly it might just for a little while. It's that we have a responsibility to stay disciplined and to keep our eyes on the prize. And so far we're making real progress. Inflation is down, interest rates are falling, exports are rising and the economy is growing. And for many New Zealanders, the prospect of a growing economy and rising incomes means a real shot at getting on top of the cost of living. Now is not the time to put that at risk. And in Budget 2025, that means staying focused, getting back to surplus, and maintaining a relentless focus on economic growth. But for Kiwis, it's more than just the dollars and the cents, because lower inflation means less stress and less heartbreak as prices stop skyrocketing and families finally stop falling behind. Lower interest rates mean a house actually becomes a home, not a source of pain and frustration as mortgage repayments crush weekly budgets. And more economic growth means thriving local businesses, higher wages, more jobs, and ultimately more money in your back pocket. It means a chance to get ahead and to beat the cost of living, and it means that we have great confidence that our best days lie ahead of us. New Zealand is the best country on planet Earth, and with the right choices, I honestly think that we can make it an even better place. Can I say thank you for your support, thank you for being here today, really appreciate it. Thank you. Hey Catherine, how are you?
Hi, very good.
You can sing and do karaoke, or you can ask a question, whatever you want to do.
I think I'll go for a question.
Okay.
Look, just want to reinforce what Catherine Rich said about the R&D tax credits. Thank you for continuing to support that. I know it's very important to a lot of our members who are doing a lot of R&D, and that will be give them the confidence to continue to invest. Consolidating the Crown Research Institutes, that seems like a good move. I think the report that we're all waiting for now in the R&D space is Sir Peter Gluckman's review of the universities. So We're really interested in knowing how the universities and all that academic talent can work better with business to create the magic. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Catherine. I mean, the reason I've probably spent 25 years actually studying other small advanced economies around the world, and you try and ask the question, why are other 5 million people countries on earth wealthier than New Zealand? And when you boil it all down, it comes down to those 5 things in that Going for Growth plan. Got to have a world-class education system, got to have more science, technology, innovation, good business settings, competitive settings, get rid of the red tape, trade and investment, and obviously infrastructure. So I've looked very closely at Singapore, I've looked at Ireland, and we've basically taken more of the Irish approach, which is to say, look, we're quite siloed with our R&D spend at the moment. A bunch of it happens in the business community, a bunch of it happens in the university sector, and the other part of it happens in the Crown institutes. And so we want to refocus, I think, the 7 Crown Research Institutes into 3 public research organisations. We also want to add an AI technology institute, research organisation into that piece as well, so we'll have 4 ultimately. But the whole idea is actually we want to commercialise that science. Too often, you'll hear New Zealanders say, oh, we invented that. It was our scientists that got that breakthrough. Well, that's lovely. I want our scientists to be the people that get fabulously wealthy off the back of it, and I want us to commercialise it. I don't want Australian or American companies commercialising low emissions ryegrass, for example. I want that to be able to be done in here in New Zealand and for commercial opportunities to come off the back of that and someone to build a big business off it. So we want to get the silos broken down, and we want to see the collaboration between the universities, business and the institutes be much more seamless, like I've observed certainly in Ireland. I've also just announced yesterday or the day before that I'm appointing a Prime Minister's Science Council, which is really designed to help us make choices, and some of you here are actually on that council, to make sure we're making choices a little bit about where the big R&D platforms we want to invest in will be that will actually power up the economy. So I've taken the universities out of vocational education, the science sector reforms and science, technology and innovation, and put that under the auspices of Shane Retty so that we can get that breakdown of silos, but we actually commercialise the sector. I'm over the time of just talking about we've got a breakthrough because of a great New Zealand scientist, let's celebrate that. Let's celebrate that, but let's also build a great business off the back of it so that we actually help our people and lift our collective, add value to our products and services and therefore our wages as a result. The only other thing, can I just say on technology, if there's no other question, is this is dangerous, guys, because I could go for 7.5 hours. I mean, Fidel Castro went for 7 hours 40 once, and that would be quite a record. But the other piece is there is, exactly as Hamish has alluded to, and I know Tracy's spoken about this to me privately as well, there is a real opportunity for us to embrace AI and technology like never before. And we've been talking about this thing coming, and it's going to be here shortly. Well, it's actually already here. And for those of you who are in that world and understand it as business leaders, every 3 months it has changed dramatically, and now it's here. And I have a huge wish when I look at the size of government and I look at the size of our public service, I want them to be large service-based organisations thinking about the public of New Zealand as customers, and therefore technology is the way in which we can actually get, for want of a better word in business speak, a single view of customer. That means that we can better serve and tailor the public of New Zealand as a result. It should be that you should be a 32-year-old mum able to say, I've got a 9 and a 7-year-old daughters, I earn $73,000 a year, what entitlements am I available to me? You should be able to put that in as a natural language request and get an answer back, like many of you do within your own businesses. So government is well behind the technology piece, and I think digitising government is actually really critical in order to get the service mentality and the customer service mindset in place from government going forward as well. Yes, ma'am.
Kia ora, Chris. Vanessa Sorensen, Microsoft. Music to our ears.
Good.
How do we execute faster? We've been talking about this for 18 months, and honestly, I think many companies in this room are investing, including us, and many others coming with data centres. I mean, the latest AI report actually said this is all scary, let's not do things. So how can we help you to truly move it forward, because nothing is stopping us now. But all that innovation globally, we do it here first. Yep. And how do we get in?
I mean, the way that I've thought about this job, and it's been 18 months, is that myself and our government and our ministers have inherited a big turnaround job. It's like when you take over a really bad company, right? You've got to get it sorted and cleaned up and sorted. And we're having to do that fiscal consolidation bit, deal with our finances, get inflation under control, interest rates, get a growth back into the economy, get unemployment trending down. So that's the basic economics that we should be doing. We're coming out of that cycle and we've actually got a choice. Do we just sit there and watch the recovery take place, or do we use this as a moment in time now to say, damn it, what country do we want to see emerge at the end of it in the next 15 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and actually let's shape the recovery so that we can realise the potential that we've got. We know for 30 years we've had an economic productivity problem under successive governments where we've failed to lift the collective living standards of New Zealanders regardless of how hard they're working, and they are working incredibly hard. So the technology piece is critical to unlocking economic productivity. We know, for example, in the small medium sector, and Business New Zealand knows this better than anybody, that when you look at the top 10% of our SME firms versus the bottom 10%, they are 7 times more productive than the bottom 10%, the top 10%, because of the way that they have embraced innovation, technology in particular, and automation and AI and other things, cloud-based apps, all of that stuff. So there's a big, big play for us, not just to keep doing things the way we have, but to jump to a different productivity curve with our businesses by embracing a lot more technology. From a government point of view, I just put it out to some of you in the room. You are starting to see how I'm wanting to work, which is rather seamlessly between government and business and community and iwi as 3 sort of equal partners in our society, but each complementary, each able to do things in a different way. I can set up the operating system and the conditions for growth, but I won't be the one doing it. It'll be you in this room creating that growth, because you can move with great speed, scale and execution and are at the front line seeing it. Our community organisations see the pain, the hurt, the need, the frustration across our society, and I want to partner with them in the same way. So it's an adult relationship between the 3 sectors in our economy, and I would encourage you, and I will be reaching out to many of you, as I have done recently on the Science Council and other areas, to see how do we get more of you and our government people working more seamlessly together. Hopefully you've got a sense of it with my ministers. I do performance reviews with them regularly. One of the key criteria is how much time are you out of the office engaging with your sectors, learning about what the solutions are, the common sense solutions. And you as a collective bunch of folk, how do you not just vomit up the problem on us? How do you actually come forward with some common sense ideas that gets the barnacles off and gets the show on the road? So watch this space, because we need some outside-in provocation for government. Yes, we're talking to Estonia. Yes, we talk to Singapore. Yes, we talk to New South Wales and others that have done and the UAE, they've done a good job in this space. There's a lot more for us to do. Yep.
Thank you. That's all the time we have.
I've got one at the back. We're going to have to get one from the back.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Priyanta. I'm from New Zealand Medics, and my question is simply for any kind of business or young worker who has solutions, and not just the paper-bound solutions, but actual plan of how to delivering it. How can we actually partner better? Because sometimes we find that there's a lot of red tape that just keeps the idea on the paper, and we just cannot deliver, because we actually want to show this is what we can create as opposed to just talk about it.
Yeah, so that's where I think organisations like Business New Zealand really come into their own. So if you're sitting at government, where we sit, and you think about all the complexity that sits in our government system, think about all the touch points that we have with lots of different people, with lots of different ideas. What helps us a lot as government is that when you can channel it through, say, Catherine and the team here at Business New Zealand and all as members, then actually Business New Zealand can pitch that into us, and actually we can respond to that. So, Catherine's team has done a good job advocating for and making the case with our ministers, and Catherine and I meet regularly, but also with our ministers on, say, for the R&D tax incentive, right, and just underscoring why that was so important for us not to let that go. Equally, if I think about in the Federated Farmers space, we've had a 12-point plan that we've actually been, Todd's been working as Minister of Agriculture with Federated Farmers to understand what their 12 common sense solutions for are, what we could do to unlock agriculture and to get it moving. And I think together you've probably done 11 of the 12 things already, which is great. So that's the way I want to work, because otherwise what happens is we end up with just lots of tactical reckons, and actually what we need to do is actually really good problem definition and then really common sense solutions in place. And that's my observation in 4 years in government, is often there's very, very poor problem definition, and as a result, solutions go roaming around in search of problems to attach to, and as a result, I need you to be able to play that through. Then my job is to try and execute government, and that's why I have the quarterly action plans with the 39 actions all clustered under rebuilding the economy, restoring law and order, delivering better health and education and public services, and then obviously the pressure on my ministers as well with good performance reviews, where we encourage them and support them and also afflict them when they need to be afflicted to deliver more. But they're doing a great job. It's a great team. Thank you.
I'd now call to the stage Tracy Ryan, CEO of Oricon, to say thank you to the Prime Minister. But while she's walking to the stage, I will thank you for a couple of things that the government's done. You're quite right. You need to have concerns and solutions.
Yes.
And one of the recent ones that that your government, led by Simeon, who's in the audience today, was to unlock New Zealand's opportunity to attract medical conferences, because
yes.
for so long we've had rules that prohibit trade expos, and who knew?
Yeah, who knew?
Small example, but that anti-red tape revolution's really important.
Yeah.
Giving the vote of thanks is Tracy, another leader of Celtic descent. Tracy leads the major companies group, and I'm very grateful for the passion and the advocacy and the time she gives to Business New Zealand. Tracy, she's also going to be closing out the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm really pleased we got a couple more questions, Prime Minister, so you didn't have to dance to
Good afternoon, everybody. Can I say thank you for waiting? It's been great to catch up here at Business New Zealand with a number of businesses and also to outline our vision that as challenging as times have been, we're turning the corner and importantly we've got a budget that's going to be very focused on economic growth, but we'll also be incredibly responsible about how we manage our economy as well, which is what we need in these uncertain times. So, but also New Zealand has a fantastic future, immense amount of potential, and that's what our Going for Growth plan is all about. Economic growth will put more money in Kiwis' back pockets. With that, happy to take your questions.
You've announced that you're going to continue the research development tax incentive. For how long?
Well, we haven't made a decision not to. It'll be continuing for as long as it does, and there's no cut-off date. We just want to roll forward with that policy. We think there's things that we'll continue to look always about in the coming years, also about what else we can do to support businesses, to get them to support their growth. But no, we want to make sure that that's understood across the business community, that policy is remaining, gives everyone certainty. As you know, we had an obligation to do a review of the scheme under law, but it's good to know that we're very comfortable with that staying in place. Great. Well, thank you very much for your questions. It's been lovely.
On pay equity, are you worried about female voters deserting nationally?
Look, what we're doing here is this is a government very committed to pay equity. We are committed to eliminating sex-based discrimination, but we are making some common sense amendments to make sure that actually it's focused on what it should be focused on, which is eliminating sex-based discrimination, not bringing in other labour conditions into those conversations. And so, I think what we're doing here is pretty sensible. Our primary focus has been, in the changes that we're making, is to make sure that it's more robust, it's more sustainable, it's much more workable.
National has previously had, problems with female voters. Are you expecting with this policy will be something that will win them over?
Well, when would you say we have?
Historically.
When?
Under earlier in, while you're in opposition.
I'd just say to you, I think New Zealand men and women actually appreciate having a government that's focused on the things that matter most to them. And of course, whether I talk to women or men, what everyone's focused on is cost of living. And what they're looking for is strong economic management in uncertain times, and that's what they're getting.
Why did you put it through under urgency? What's the urgent nature of this? If it's not an economic consideration for the budget, what is the rationale?
The rationale is that it's unworkable to create the
urgency through budget?
Sure, I was about to answer. It's important because we don't want to have two competing systems. You want to give people massive amounts of certainty and to make sure that we've got one system to operate in the pay equity space. This doesn't preclude any individual, any union making a new application under the pay equity laws that we've just passed.
What about you punching down on women with these changes? What's your response to that?
Well, I totally disagree. What we're trying to do is this is a government very committed to pay equity. It's a government very committed to eliminating sex-based discrimination. But it's also about making sure we're making some common sense adjustments, essentially to get it back to what was proposed under the last national government in 2017. And so, what you're seeing here is actually to make it, it honestly is to make it much more workable and sustainable going forward and to give everyone maximum amounts of clarity. And so, that's what this is about. It's about making sure that we've got a system and pay equity that gives everybody massive amounts of clarity and is much more workable.
Do you think the opposition is scaremongering?
Yeah, look, I do, but I think the reality for us is that we are focused on pay equity. There is no doubt this government is committed to that. We are committed to eliminating sex-based discrimination, but also what we're doing is making sure a system is much more workable, and it is focused on the intention of what it was designed to do, which was to eliminate sex-based discrimination. And you've seen some very broad claims come through. You've seen, some very, different comparators. Think about school librarians being compared to fisheries officers, and all we're doing is some common sense adjustments to make sure that the system stays very focused, is very workable and sustainable going forward.
The savings from them, though, like Bernard Heaton's done his calculations, says it's $17 billion worth of savings over 4 years as opposed to the $14 billion for tax cuts over the tax relief over the next 4 years. Is the economic consideration not just purely driving this in terms of it coming through before the budget?
Well, as I said, our primary focus has been to make sure we get a much more workable system. What the government has done is put money aside for pay equity obligations that will come under the new legislation. I admit that the costs will be likely lower for government going forward, but as I said, individuals, unions can certainly make applications under that. As to quantums, we'll talk about that when we get to the budget.
We've also spoken to some under 16-year-olds about the social media changes.
Yes.
They have said instead of worrying about banning social media, you should worry about paying women fairly. What's your response to that?
Well, we are deeply committed to equal pay. We're deeply committed to pay parity, and we are also committed to pay equity. Those are the different concepts around making sure that women get paid equally as men. But in pay equity space, all we're doing is making sure that we've made some common sense adjustments to make sure that that system is more workable going forward, and that's important that we do that. But what I'd say to you is we are a government very much focused on what New Zealanders want, and you talk to women, men, young people, older people, what they're all wrestling with right now is the cost of living, and that requires a government very much focused on economic growth. That's obviously what our budget will deliver.
The national unemployment rate.
What's your response to students who say they'll find a way around social media bans?
Well, look, all we're doing here is just making sure, having spoken to many parents, many teachers, many principals, who say, look, social media it's got some really positive things, but it's also got some really negative things, and they see it impacting our children's well-being, particularly with respect to being exposed to inappropriate content, particularly when you think about social media addiction, and as a result, wanting to make sure that we put some safe lines and some guidelines around that. I want to make sure, in the same way we have protections in the physical world in New Zealand, we also need to have protections in the virtual world.
The national unemployment rate is 5.1, but it's 6.4 in Auckland and going up. What's it failing in Auckland?
Well, again, we've got an economic recovery underway. It's a little bit too speed at the moment. We're seeing it being launched out of the agricultural sector, through the tourism sector, and particularly in the South Island, as I noted in my speech, Otago, Southland, Canterbury. And we are working hard to make sure that we do get growth back into Auckland and all our metropolitan centres as well. And it is coming, and as I said, the trend will be our friend as we work our way through that. But again, what do we have to do? We have to make sure that we run the economy well and deal with the fundamentals of government spending and inflation and interest rates and growth. But also we have this huge opportunity, as I've tried to outline through the Going for Growth plan, not just to watch the recovery take place, but actually to shape it so that we can really step change our productivity as a country and get those higher paying jobs that we want to see happen here. So it's a government that's very, very focused on economic growth in order to get it across all of the country.
How does it impact the country when Auckland's struggling though?
Well, as I said, let's be clear, there are real sectors that are still struggling. There are others that are coming through the recovery well, certainly agriculture, tourism, as I've mentioned. But we're going to continue to focus on economic growth, and that's what our budget's going to be focused on.
You've got about $500 billion in capital spend in the budget. What are you going to do with that?
Well, as I said, we want to make sure that we invest that in some frontline services, health, education, transport. As you know, we've got a big program around building out world-class infrastructure so that actually that can help New Zealanders economically, socially, environmentally. And that's important that we continue to invest in capital that's productivity enhancing. And that's really what we're doing.
Why is now the right time to cut, reducing the operating allowance? I don't accept that you're increasing the capital allowance, but why is now the right time to cut some elements of the budget?
Well, what we're doing is just operating within a smaller operating allowance. We're not cutting an allowance. It's not a negative allowance. It's actually a $1.6 billion or $1.3 billion allowance. And what we're doing there is making sure that actually, as I said in my speech, when we actually have good fiscal management that actually puts us on a pathway to pay down our debt, to make sure that we get economic growth, we keep inflation low, interest rates low, that's very, very important. And that's contributing to lower interest rates, as you saw when I referenced in the speech, the ANZ report saying that smaller operating allowance creates 5 to 10 basis points of lower interest rates. The Treasury's assessment of the package, or the budgetary package, creating 30 basis points lower of interest rates. All of that adds up a lot. How does it add up? Well, at the moment you've seen it. We've gone from 5.5 to 3.5% of interest. If you think about someone with a 25-year mortgage, $500,000, that's $300 a fortnight that's back in their pocket that they get to spend in the economy as we go forward. So, for us it's about fiscal discipline really matters, because as we've seen, the pain and suffering has come from losing that fiscal discipline. You have to have your budget initiatives anchored in a fiscal strategy.
And it's all happening at a time in a global context where things could go badly quite fast, right? So, the government may need to step in and do additional
Well,
measures?
but that's frankly why you need political leaders that are economically literate and can actually navigate New Zealand through challenging times. And that's what we're saying here is we are clear-eyed about the challenges that we see out there in the world, but you've seen a government from day one be very, very focused on actually growing our economy, rebuilding the economy, lowering the cost of living. That's what we're fixated on, and now's not the time to put any of that at risk.
Are you in danger of perhaps getting the worst of both worlds out of this strategy, in the sense that there's still several years till you hit a surplus, but equally, economy's potentially going to go through tough times, and maybe, arguably, more spending might be needed than you will allocate?
Well, I want people who advocate that to be very clear about that, because, as I said in my speech, under successive finance ministers, you saw New Zealand able to respond incredibly well through the GFC, post the Christchurch earthquake, and through the COVID experience by virtue of having lower levels of public debt. And that's why I say good fiscal management is important, because I want to make sure that we pass off a good set of books to future administrations should we have any other crisis that comes upon us. But what you're seeing in this budget is responsible economic management, focus on growth, and yes, while we acknowledge it's challenging times and it's difficult economic conditions globally, we've got a great plan to be able to navigate New Zealand through that.
Successive finance ministers, was that a compliment to Grant Robertson?
No, I wouldn't count that experience as a successful period in New Zealand's life. I just put it to you, that economic vandalism caused huge pain on low and middle income working New Zealanders, and I find that utterly unacceptable that there was such a cavalier economic vandalism and illiteracy, frankly, under that administration that has caused the pain and suffering for low and middle income working New Zealanders. If you care about low and middle income working New Zealanders, you run the economy well, you have a responsible set of fiscal strategies in order to navigate the economy through it.
When you said New Zealand as well served during the COVID period by finance ministers, sorry, that's what I was...
Yeah, Bill English did a great job of leaving the incoming administration with a low level of public debt, as you saw, around $60 billion, now sitting at 3 times higher at $180 billion, with an interest bill that was $3.5 billion a year, now almost $9 billion and rising. And that's a great example of a good finance minister who stewarded New Zealand's finances